The snow had started to fall earlier than expected. Claire Bennett squinted through the windshield as flakes smeared across the glass, caught in the frantic swipe of the wipers. Her Tesla had slowed to a crawl on the winding stretch of Beartooth Pass, one of the most treacherous mountain roads in the American Northwest. She had taken this shortcut from Billings to Denver in an impulsive attempt to reach a last-minute meeting with a major agricultural investor, one of those change-the-game opportunities her startup desperately needed. Until the car died. Just like that. The dashboard went dark. No signal. No sound. Just the sudden silence that seemed far too loud in the middle of a snow-covered nowhere. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. Another try. Nothing. Claire bit her lip, glanced at the GPS on her phone, only to see a spinning wheel where the map should have been. No service. For a moment, she sat there in stillness. The falling snow gathered along the edges of the windshield, white and soft and relentless. Her fingers drummed nervously against the steering wheel. This was not part of the plan. Nothing ever derailed her plans. Not since she was 15. She pushed open the door, tugging her coat tight around her as the cold slapped her face. The wind howled. Her boots sank slightly into the fresh snow. In the distance, just beyond the curve of the mountain, she spotted a sign. Weathered wood, slightly crooked, engine ou a single rusted chain. Miller's Auto Repair, honest work, no BS. It didn't inspire confidence. But it was the only option. Claire trudged up the narrow slope, her heels slipping slightly on the frozen dirt path. The garage was tucked into a clearing, more a shed than a real building, with an old Ford pickup parked out front and the faint smell of gasoline in the air. She stepped inside without knocking. The warmth hit her immediately, radiating from a space heater in the corner and a small fire crackling in an old cast-iron stove. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a beanie pulled low and grease smudged on his forearms, was crouched over the open hood of a snowmobile. He looked up. "Let me guess," he said. "Tesla. Snow. Beartooth Pass. No signal." Claire blinked. "Yes," she said, suddenly aware of how out of place her tailored coat and leather gloves looked in this rustic corner of the world. "You must be psychic." "No," the man said with a grin. "Just happens every week." She hesitated before stepping further in. "My name is Claire Bennett. I'm on my way to Denver. My car died a few miles back. Can you come take a look?" He wiped his hands on a rag, tossed it aside, and walked over. "Ethan Miller," he said, offering a hand. His grip was firm, but not rough. "Let me grab my coat. We'll go take a look." They drove his pickup back to the Tesla, headlights cutting through the thickening flurry. Ethan popped the hood and poked around with a flashlight. "Battery's frozen," he said after a while. "You left it running in this weather with no thermal mod? That's like asking a fish to ride a bicycle." Claire bristled. She hated being lectured. Hated being caught off guard. She folded her arms. "How long to fix it?" "In this snow." He straightened, looking at the sky. "Idée c'est tomorrow. Midday at the earliest. I'll pay double your rate." He shook his head. "I don't rush work. Especially not in weather that can kill a man. Or woman." Claire exhaled, frustrated. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You fix cars for a living. I'm not asking for a miracle." Ethan leaned against his truck and looked at her for a long second. "Lady, I fixe machine. I don't control weather, time, or God." A pause. Then, irritated, cold, and desperate, Claire said something she didn't plan to say. "Fine. Fix it tonight and I'll marry you." The words fell from her lips like steam in the cold air. Half a joke. Half a challenge. Ethan didn't flinch. Just smiled. "You promise?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't flatter yourself." They drove back to the garage. Inside, the fire was warmer now, and the smell of something sweet drifted from the back room. Claire sat stiffly on the only clean chair she could find while Ethan disappeared into what looked like a tiny kitchen. A few minutes later, a small girl peeked around the corner. She couldn't have been older than 6, with messy brown curls and oversized socks slipping off her feet. "Hi," she said, holding a mug with both hands. "Are you cold?" Claire blinked. Yes, I guess." The girl walked over, placed the mug in her lap.
It's hot chocolate.
I made it. Daddy says it helps with mountain grumps. Claire stared at her. And you are? Lily, the girl said, climbing onto a stool and swinging her legs.
Are you gonna marry my dad?
Claire coughed, nearly spilling the cocoa. What? No. Why would you think that? You said so, Lily said with the calm confidence only children possess. Claire looked at Ethan, who was leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, amused. I was joking, she muttered.
Ethan shrugged.
Tell that to her. That night, Claire slept on a cot in the corner of the garage, wrapped in a borrowed blanket that smelled faintly of pine and engine oil. The storm raged outside, shaking the tin roof, but the fire kept the cold at bay. She couldn't sleep. Outside her cocoon, she could hear Ethan humming something low and soft.
Allu l'habit, Meb.
Then Lily's small voice, Daddy, do you like her? A pause. She seems tired, Ethan replied. Like you.
Another pause.
No, he said. More like, she doesn't know where to rest. Claire closed her eyes, her throat tight. No one had ever said something so quietly true about her. Not her board of investors. Not Daniel Hayes, her ex and current COO. Not even her therapist. Rest. She hadn't done that in decades. Not since her mother died. Not since she made it her mission to never need anyone ever again. In the early hours of morning, when the snow had slowed and the fire had burned down to embers, Claire sat up and looked around the garage. The tools were neatly arranged. Lily slept on the sofa, curled up under a quilt. Ethan had fallen asleep on the floor, one arm slung over his head. Something stirred in her. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something more dangerous. It was the thought, what if I didn't have to go back? What if I just stayed? But she pushed it down.
Like everything else.
Morning would come. The snow would melt. The car would start again. And so would she. At least, that's what she told herself. The morning sun filtered through the frost-lined window panes of the garage, casting long golden beams across the oil-stained floor. Claire stirred on the cot, momentarily confused by her surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, the dead Tesla, the snowstorm, the garage, Ethan, and Lily with her oversized socks and warm cocoa.
Claire sat up slowly, her back stiff from the makeshift bed.
Outside, the snow had thinned to a quiet hush. A new silence, not the sterile corporate silence of high-rise conference rooms, but something alive, pulsing. The kind that comes only after a night of nature reminding you how small you really are. Ethan was already outside, the sound of metal clinking echoing through the morning. She stood, wrapped herself in the borrowed flannel blanket, and stepped to the doorway. He was kneeling by her Tesla, hood open again, steam rising as sunlight hit the frozen parts. You slept? He asked, not looking up. Eventually. You dream.
Claire hésita-t-elle. Note the kind du remembé.
Ethan nodded as if that made perfect sense. She joined him by the car. How's it look? He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Better. Battery needed to be warmed, and the internal systems had to reset. Should be running by this afternoon. Claire let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Thanks, she said. I mean it. Ethan gave a small nod, then turned back to the car. Most people wouldn't have stayed the night. They'd have panicked, called a tow truck, or tried to hike back down the mountain. Most people don't spend their lives trying to stay in control, Claire said quietly. I didn't have many options.
Ethan glanced at her. Contrôlait sa fenêtre.
We think it makes us strong. Sometimes it just makes us alone. She didn't reply. Back inside, Lily was sitting cross-legged on the floor, scribbling in a notebook. She looked up when Claire entered, grinning.
Good morning, almost my stepmom.
Claire blinked. Lily. Just kidding, Lily said with a giggle. I know you were joking. But Daddy hasn't laughed like that in a while, so you should joke more. Claire smiled despite herself. Thanks for the advice. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of quiet activity. Ethan fixed a snowblower for a local farmer who stopped by. Claire offered to help organize the tools on the wall, aligning the wrenches and pliers with precision. Lily quizzed her on car part names, turning it into a game. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. At lunch, they sat around a small wooden table in the back of the garage. Ethan had made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Claire took a bite, surprised. This is actually good. I was a line cook for 2 years in Chicago, Ethan said. Long enough to learn grilled cheese is an art. Claire looked at him. Chicago. He nodded. I used to be a mechanical engineer. Worked at a powertrain manufacturing plant. Had a decent career, benefits, a mortgage. Then a fire happened. I was in charge of the safety inspections that week. Claire's hand paused on her spoon. They said it was negligence. I said it was a system failure. The company needed a scapegoat. I was the convenient one. She was silent. It was all too familiar.
I lost my job.
My license.
And then, my wife.
He paused. She said she didn't sign up for a man with no future. Claire studied his face. There was no bitterness in his voice.
Just a tirade sort of peas.
I'm sorry, she said. I'm not, he replied, surprising her. If it hadn't all fallen apart, I'd never have found this town. Or this garage. Or Lily. Claire smiled faintly.
She's something.
She saved me, Ethan said simply. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Claire asked, what about you?
You ever think of going back? To engineering?
To the city. I did. For a while. But you spend enough time out here, fixing things that matter, things that keep people moving, you realize that titles and paychecks don't measure value. Claire looked down at her bowl. I used to think they did.
You don't anymore.
I don't know, she said. That's the problem. He didn't press. Later that afternoon, the Tesla blinked back to life. Ethan ran a final check, then closed the hood.
You're good to go.
Claire looked at the car, then back at the garage. At Lily, who was dancing with a wrench in her hand like it was a fairy wand. At Ethan, wiping his hands clean, as always. I should leave, she said. You could, he replied.
Or you could stay another night.
Roads are still slick.
Snow is coming again.
She hesitated. In the end, she stayed. That evening, after Lily went to bed, Claire and Ethan sat on the front steps of the garage, sipping tea and watching the stars. The sky was the kind of clear you never saw in San Francisco, deep and infinite. You seem like someone who used to dream a lot, Ethan said.
Claire exhaled a soft log.
Used to.
What did you want?
Freedom, she said. Which is ironic. Because I got it, and all it made me was tired. Ethan nodded, staring up at the sky. I used to want to build the fastest engines in the world. Now I just want to build a life Lily won't want to run from. Claire looked at him. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance. Not yet.
But something deeper.
Recognition. The quiet knowing of two people who'd both been broken, rebuilt, and were now, tentatively, reaching towards something they didn't yet understand. As the wind picked up and the stars flickered, Claire said, almost absently, I think I forgot how to want things that don't come with a return on investment. Ethan smiled gently. Then maybe it's time you invested in something that doesn't pay back in numbers. She didn't reply. But she didn't leave, either. And that, perhaps, was the beginning of everything else. Claire's phone buzzed incessantly on the small wooden table, the notifications piling up like an avalanche she had been trying to ignore. But the moment she picked up the device, she saw the deluge of messages, calls, and emails, each one more demanding than the last. Daniel Hayes had reached out yet again. This time, there was no subtlety. We need to talk, Claire. The board is asking questions. You've been unreachable for days. I suggest you come back to San Francisco before things get out of hand. The words felt like a slap to her face. They weren't just an offer for reconciliation. They were an ultimatum. But Claire didn't know what hurt more, those words, or the fact that she had already known this moment was coming. She had been running away, not only from her company, but from herself. Sitting on the cold wooden steps of the garage, she stared at the text for a long while. A gust of wind stirred the leaves around her feet, and for a brief moment, she wanted to forget about everything.
The noise, the pressure, the expectation.
But deep down, she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. After a long pause, Ethan came outside, as if sensing her unrest. He sat down beside her without saying a word. He didn't need to. She showed him the message, her finger tracing the screen with a hint of bitterness. "I guess it's time to go back, huh?" she said quietly, trying to mask the exhaustion in her voice. Ethan looked at the screen for a moment, then sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You don't have to go back, Claire." "I have to," she replied, her voice hardening. "They'll take everything. The company. The investors. They'll destroy everything I've built. You don't understand how this works." "I don't," Ethan admitted. "But I know one thing. You don't have to sacrifice your soul for them. There's always another way." Claire shook her head, her fingers tightening around her phone. She was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of running, tired of losing herself. The woman she had been a year ago seemed like someone else. Someone she didn't even recognize. The next morning, Claire drove her Tesla down the snowy road, heading back toward civilization, leaving behind the peaceful quiet of Wyoming, the garage, and Ethan. She couldn't help but feel the weight of her decision settling heavily in her chest. The drive to Denver, then back to San Francisco, was an emotional blur. She spent the entire journey lost in thoughts of the storm she had just left behind. For all her strength and ambition, Claire couldn't shake the feeling of being broken in ways that no business achievement could ever fix. As soon as she arrived in San Francisco, the storm caught up with her. Her first meeting with the board was cold, and not just because the air conditioning was cranked up too high. Daniel was sitting at the head of the table, his usual self-assured smile replaced with something sharper, more calculating. "I trust your vacation was refreshing, Claire?" Daniel began, his tone smooth but full of hidden edges. "It seems the rest of us were working overtime to keep this company from imploding."
Claire sat down at the head of the table, feeling like a stranger in her own office.
The glass walls of the high-rise building felt like a cage, the city stretching out far below, its noise and light a constant reminder of the life she had chosen. The life she had let consume her. "I wasn't on vacation," Claire replied evenly. "I needed time to clear my head. But I'm back now, and I'm ready to talk about the future."
Daniel's eyes narrowed.
"Good. Because we've got a lot to discuss. You've been out of touch for a week. The investors are losing faith. They're asking questions about our direction, and frankly, your absence doesn't inspire confidence." "I needed time to think," Claire said, trying to steady herself. This company was never supposed to be about quick fixes. It was about creating something meaningful. Daniel scoffed, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Meaningful?
Claire, let's be real.
You can't run a company like this on idealism. You have to be ruthless. You've been holding on to this vision of yours, but the numbers aren't adding up. If you can't deliver, I'll have to step in." The words stung more than they should have.
Claire sat sank.
She had always prided herself on the mission of her company, on the values they built around sustainable agriculture. But in that moment, she realized Daniel was right. She couldn't have both, the ideal and the reality. The price of success in this world wasn't just financial, it demanded everything. "Let me remind you, Daniel," Claire said, her voice growing steadier. "I built this company. Not you. Not anyone else. I'm not going to let you tear it down because you want to turn it into some money-making machine." A tense silence filled the room. The board members shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "I'm offering you a way out. Step down now, gracefully. You'll be seen as the visionary who made the hard call. Let me handle things for the good of the company. And we'll make sure you're taken care of." Claire's jaw clenched. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about the fight for her soul. She couldn't let him win.
"Not like this. You know what?"
Claire stood up abruptly, feeling the surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins.
"I don't need your pity or your money.
I'll make this work on my own. And when it succeeds, you'll have no choice but to acknowledge the way I've done things." Without another word, she turned and left the room. Her heart was pounding, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was defiance.
The storm had only just begun.
That evening, Claire sat alone in her office, staring at the city skyline. She had never felt more isolated. The phone in her hand felt like a weight she couldn't shake, and she had yet to respond to Daniel's latest email, another ultimatum, this time threatening legal action if she didn't resign. But the thought of going back to her old life, to the person she had once been, felt unbearable. The clock ticked loudly in the silence of her office. She couldn't keep running. She had to face this fight. Not for the company. Not for the investors. But for herself. She picked up the phone and dialed Ethan's number. It rang once. Twice. Then, his deep voice came through the receiver. Ethan. It's Claire. I know. You've been thinking about this too, haven't you? I'm coming back, she said, her voice firm. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm going to make sure that whatever happens, it's on my terms. And no one, is going to tell me I can't be myself in this. Ethan was silent for a moment. Good, he said simply.
Yell'll be waiting.
Claire hung up, feeling something shift within her, a spark of hope, no matter how small. The storm hadn't passed yet. But now, she was ready to face it head-on. Claire arrived at the airport in San Francisco early the next morning, her suitcase feeling heavier than it had in days. She felt like she was carrying not just her clothes and personal belongings, but the weight of everything she had left behind. The city was bustling with the typical energy of tech giants and corporate skyscrapers, but for Claire, it now felt like a place where dreams were only real if they came with the right price tag. She boarded the flight to Wyoming, not knowing exactly what she was going back to. Ethan had told her, there's always another way, but she hadn't seen it. In her world, there was only one way to play the game, and she had tried to make it her own. But the battle had drained her. Every decision she made now felt like a tug-of-war between who she was and who she had to be. The flight was long, and Claire spent most of it staring out the window, her mind a swirl of decisions. The company was unraveling faster than she'd anticipated. Investors were pulling out, and the media coverage of her disappearance from the boardroom had painted her as unreliable. Her once unshakable confidence had become a shadow, cast by her own choices. When Claire landed in Billings, she rented a car and drove through the familiar yet haunting landscape toward Wyoming. The mountains loomed in the distance, a reminder of the quiet strength that Ethan had shown her. This trip wasn't about fixing her company though. It was about fixing herself. She arrived at the garage in the late afternoon, the sun already dipping behind the peaks. The snow had stopped, leaving a crisp chill in the air. Ethan was there, leaning against the side of a truck, as if he had known exactly when she would arrive. You made it, he said with a quiet smile. I'm back, Claire said, her voice thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Do you need to talk about it? Ethan asked, his tone gentle but expectant.
Claire shook her head.
I think I just need to do something real. Something I can actually touch, you know? Something that isn't just about survival. Ethan nodded. Sometimes the hardest part is knowing what's real. She followed him into the garage, where Lily was tinkering with a set of old tools, humming to herself. Claire watched as the little girl focused intently, her face scrunched in concentration.
Lily, Claire said, stepping into the room. Do you mind if I help?
Lily looked up with a grin. Only if you're not too fancy for tools.
Claire looked softly, shaking her head.
I guess we'll find out. For the next few hours, they worked together on the simplest of tasks, organizing parts, fixing broken equipment, and making small repairs around the garage. For the first time in what felt like ages, Claire wasn't thinking about the board, the investors, or her next move. She was simply existing in the moment. And it felt like freedom. As night fell, they sat around a small fire in the garage, the only light in the room coming from the crackling flames. Ethan pulled out a couple of beers, and they passed them between themselves. Back in the city, Claire started, I was always told that success meant doing more. Always striving.
Always pushing forward.
But I never really stopped to ask myself if I even wanted it anymore. Ethan leaned back against the wall, looking at her. And now? Now I don't know what I want, Claire admitted, the truth slipping out with surprising ease. But I do know that I don't want to lose myself again. I spent so many years building something. And for what? To be miserable and out of control. Sometimes you've got to step away from everything to see if you can breathe, Ethan said softly.
You've been holding your breath for too long, Claire.
She stared into the fire, the heat warming her face but not quite reaching the cold place inside.
Éternel word linger, like à qui invitation tout change, tout start over.
The next day, After a peaceful morning spent in the garage with Lily, Claire made the decision. She was going to quit. Not just the company, but everything that had made her feel like she was trapped in a cycle of endless competition. She would leave her corporate life behind, not just for Ethan, but for herself. She didn't need a boardroom or a flashy office to feel valid. She had found something more meaningful in the simplicity of this life, something she could build from the ground up. She made the call to her board while standing in the snow outside the garage. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't beg. She simply informed them that she was stepping down, effective immediately. She offered no explanation beyond the fact that her vision no longer aligned with the direction of the company. As she hung up, she felt a weight lift from her chest. She had done it. She had taken back control, on her own terms. Later that evening, Ethan and Claire walked through the quiet streets of the small town, the stars above them shining brightly. The world was still, as if holding its breath for what might come next. "You really did it," Ethan said quietly.
You made a choice for yourself.
"I think that's the first choice I've made in a long time," Claire said, her voice soft, almost to herself. "But I'm not sure what happens next. I don't know if I'm ready to be this person." Ethan stopped walking and looked at her, his expression serious but gentle. "You don't have to be anyone else. You're already enough." The words hit Claire harder than she expected. The idea of being enough, just as she was, without the titles, without the achievements, was a foreign concept. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she needed anything more. She didn't need to prove anything. The decision had been made, and Claire was ready to embrace the unknown. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of practical decisions. She sold her stake in the company, legally severing all ties with her former life. But rather than feeling lost, she felt like she was finally coming home. The work at the garage had grown, and the business was doing better than she had ever expected. Ethan and Claire had started talking about expanding, maybe even opening a training program for young people interested in learning mechanics. They were building something together.
A réel, tangible futur.
One evening, as they sat in front of the fire after another long day of work, Ethan turned to Claire. "You know, you could always stay here for good. I know you think you don't belong, but I think you do." Claire smiled, a quiet, contented smile. Maybe I finally found a place where I can breathe." And for the first time in years, Claire Bennett felt the truth of that statement settle comfortably in her bones. She didn't have to be anyone else anymore. She just had to be herself. As the fire crackled and Lily drifted off to sleep on the couch, Claire knew one thing for certain: she was exactly where she needed to be. The months that followed were unlike anything Claire had ever experienced. After leaving her former life behind in San Francisco, she felt lighter, but not in the way she had expected. There were no quick fixes, no grand gestures. Instead, there was the quiet work of rebuilding, piece by piece, day by day. At first, she spent most of her time working alongside Ethan and Lily in the garage. The business had started to pick up, and the community, who had once been skeptical of outsiders, began to trust them. People came by for repairs, sure, but they also came for advice, for help. Ethan had been a mechanic all his life, but it was Claire's influence that helped organize the garage, set up a website, and manage finances in a way that kept them on track. The operation was small, but it was growing, and Claire took pride in every detail. It was strange at first, not to be in control of everything, but slowly, she found that giving up some of that control was exactly what she needed. The simplicity of fixing things, of being needed in a way that didn't require approval or praise, felt liberating. One evening, as Claire and Ethan were cleaning up after another long day in the shop, Lily ran up to them, holding a stack of papers in her hands. Look, she said, waving the papers around excitedly. "I wrote a story about us." Claire took the papers from Lily, glancing over them. The story was about a family of mechanics who built a garage that didn't just fix cars, it fixed hearts. There was a line in it that struck Claire hard: they weren't just fixing machines. They were fixing people who didn't know they were broken. Claire smiled and hugged Lily. "I love it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think this might be the most beautiful story I've ever read." Ethan, watching them, smiled softly. "It's true though. We don't just fix the car, Claire.
We fixe what est indernit.
We teach people how to trust again." For the first time, Claire saw the truth in those words. The garage had become something bigger than a business. It had become a sanctuary, a place where people came to feel whole again. And for the first time in her life, Claire was starting to feel whole too. As spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and longer days, Claire made another decision. She had already decided to stay in Wyoming, but now she felt ready to do something bigger with her life. She wanted to give back to the community that had taken her in when she had nothing to offer. Ethan had always talked about expanding the garage and offering training for young people who wanted to learn the trade. It was a dream he had kept to himself for years, but now with Claire's skills in organizing and managing, they could make it a reality. They started small, opening a training program for local teenagers and young adults who didn't have the resources to go to college. The program taught them everything from basic car repair to customer service, and the response was overwhelming. Word spread quickly, and soon they had a small group of eager students, many of whom had never even touched a wrench before. Claire found herself becoming more involved in the community than she had ever thought possible. She was teaching business classes to the students, showing them how to manage money, create budgets, and plan for the future. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. She was giving them the tools to build their own futures, just like she had built hers from the ground up. As the program grew, so did their reputation. People from surrounding towns started to hear about the small garage that was changing lives. Ethan and Claire's story became one of redemption and hope, and the garage became a symbol of resilience in a world that often seemed indifferent to the struggles of everyday people. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of working with the students and fixing cars, Claire sat on the porch of the garage with Ethan, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I never thought I'd end up here," Claire said quietly, her eyes fixed on the fading light. "But I'm glad I did." Ethan glanced over at her, his expression unreadable. "You did more than just end up here.
You built something." Claire smiled, a soft, genuine smile.
"We built something," she corrected him. "And it's real this time. Not for the investors, not for anyone else. But for us. For this community." Ethan nodded, his eyes lingering on the sky. "It's been a long road. But we're getting somewhere." "And the best part?" Claire said, turning to face him. "The best part is that we're not alone anymore." Ethan's lips twitched into a smile. "No, we're not." Over the following months, the garage continued to grow. The training program flourished, and several of their students had moved on to full-time jobs at local businesses, while others had even started their own small ventures. Claire found herself working alongside the students more and more, teaching them the lessons she had learned the hard way, the importance of perseverance, the value of community, and the strength that comes from choosing the right path, even when it's the hardest one. One afternoon, after finishing a session with a new group of students, Claire sat down at her desk, reviewing some paperwork for the garage's upcoming expansion.
The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow across the room.
She had come a long way from the woman who once lived in a glass tower, consumed by ambition and the pursuit of perfection. But she had found something better. Something more lasting. Her phone buzzed, and Claire glanced at the screen. It was a message from one of her old investors in San Francisco. The text was short: "I hear you've been busy. Want to talk about coming back?
We have a place for you if you want it."
Claire read the message twice, then put the phone down, smiling to herself. She didn't need to respond. Not yet. Turning back to the window, Claire saw Lily running toward the garage, holding a new set of car keys in her hand, excited to show them off. Ethan was close behind, laughing as he jogged after her. It wasn't the life Claire had once imagined for herself, but it was the life she had built. A life that mattered. A life filled with purpose and connection. She watched them with a sense of peace settling over her, a peace that had been so elusive in the past. "No, I don't think I'll be going back," Claire whispered to herself, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. Because Claire had finally realized that some things were worth far more than a paycheck. And she had found that here, in this small town, in the garage that didn't just fix cars, it healed hearts. She had finally found her place. And she wasn't leaving anytime soon.